Not- Okay, there we go. Good morning. Welcome to First Parish in Hingham, also known as Old Ship Church. I'm Trish McAleer, a member of your Board of Trustees. As Unitarian Universalists, we gather here as an open community that honors freedom of belief, encourages spiritual growth in ourselves and our children, and shares the wisdom of the many religious traditions with reverence for the earth and in service to humanity. We gather here on the ancestral land of the Massachusetts people, the original nation of this land. We are mindful that for the Massachusetts people of every generation, this land is sacred. If you are visiting or newly attending our services, welcome. You and everyone else are welcome to gather for coffee and conversation just down the street at 14 Main Street following service. Today, I'd like to extend a special welcome to our guest preacher, who is going to be Jonathan Price. Jonathan's filling in for Reverend Edmund, who we expect to be back next week. Are there any announcements this morning?
Good morning. I'm Lisa Patterson, and I'm here to report on the huge success that we had with Mary Market yesterday and all our fears of the unknown being in a different place besides the fellowship hall were all allayed, and I'm sure even next year will be even more successful because now we know what to expect there. I want to thank everybody in the room who helped, and there's a lot that are not here that helped, and we so appreciate it. And socially, I think we brought in people from the community that might not have come because we were in downtown Hingham. And financially, I think we did really well. Jack had said, we only expect you to raise 5,000, and I know we doubled that, so that's good. I haven't got the final tally in yet, but I think it's at least over 12 or 13. Do you know? 12,000. Okay, that's great. So somewhere around where we did last year, so that's great. And we brought some of Mary Market to Fellowship. So if you go to Fellowship at 14 Main, Carol and Janice have set up a table of all kinds of goodies. And then we have goodies, I believe, from the bake shop. And Sharon brought her baskets. And there's jewelry. So if you're looking for any Christmas presents, holiday gifts, they're there. So, you know, we know what we're up against next year, and we'll start again next year. So, but thanks again, and I appreciate everyone's help again. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, especially Lisa for taking on as our chair this year for Mary Market. Please note in your order of service this week's other scheduled of events here at Old Ship. If you have any questions, please stop by our welcome table at 14 Main. And you can also ask any member of our board who will be happy to answer your questions. You can find them by seeing the little pink border on their name tags. We're happy you are with us today. We welcome you to bring all that you are to this congregation, your beliefs, your traditions, your identity, your story, and the wisdom of your years. You are welcome here. If you are looking for inspiration, comfort, or connection, we hope you will find it here. Our morning service will now begin.
Good morning. I'm thrilled to be back here with you. Thank you for inviting me. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And as I noted last week, of course, Old Ship and its legacy and its beauty precedes itself. So I knew of this space before I came. As I noted last week, my first surprise, my first impression was how much light is in here, despite the ancient dark wood, and the photos don't quite do it justice. There's so much light here. My other impression that I can only share now after the fact is there was so much warmth here as well. You welcomed me and my son, and as I noted to Christopher after, you clapped on the offbeat of the song. There was real life here. I felt it, and it was a joy to share in it. And I'm glad to be back. So may we all lean into the light of the space, the light of our hearts and our community, the joy of this day. May we gather our hearts together in worship.
Love can transform the world. Love is the aspiration, the spirit that moves and inspires this faith we share. Rightly understood, love can nurture our spirits and transform the world. May the flame of the chalice honor and embody the power and the blessing of the love we need, the love we give, and the love we are challenged always to remember and to share with others.
May we stand as is comfortable to do and to join together in the singing of hymn 241, In the Bleak Midwinter.
It's now time for the sharing of joys and sorrows and concerns. If you would like to share something you're carrying, please raise your hand. And when you are acknowledged, stand and briefly speak your joy, sorrow, or concern. Carol?
Carol Valentine, I'd like to light a candle of joy and rejoice that our friend Diane Elliott is home after her surgery and she's doing really well.
I'd like to light a candle of thanks for Vespers. I had the great good fortune to be able to attend last Wednesday between 6 and 6:30. It was just the most calm, spiritual to be in this building with just a few people uh, who played some beautiful music and had just some short, powerful words to say as well. So, candle of appreciation for Vespers and the space to be in.
Thank you, Steve.
Colin, is there anyone on Zoom? Colin, anyone?
Ralph?
Please light a candle of love for the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Thank you. Lisa?
I'm Lisa. A candle of sorrow for the suffering of all the innocent people as a result of war.
Thank you. These candles burn us well for any joys and sorrows deeply felt but unspoken among us today.
As I noted last week, I facilitate a mindfulness practice group on Fridays in Cohasset. And out of the abundance of our practice, I wanted to share this morning for our meditation another contemplative practice that we might engage this morning in together. We're going to hear a reading in a little bit from the same Buddhist teacher and writer that we heard from last week. She offers a beautiful image that we'll hear. And for our meditation, I'm going to share another reading from the Sufi mystic Jalaluddin Rumi, maybe familiar to you. And in this practice, the invitation is to hear a brief sacred text, a snippet of a verse from Rumi. I'm going to read this short verse twice, slowly. And the invitation is to let the words wash over you. Your mind might want to think about them. You can notice the impulse to think and let it go in the moment. Let the words wash over you like a warm breeze or cool water on a warm day. And the invitation is to notice what word or image catches your attention. And then in the silence to hold the word or image that has caught your attention, welcoming the word in with each in-breath and with each out-breath, just resting with this word or image. It might be that when we practice like this with any words, any verse, a word or image might be unsettling. That's okay. We welcome whatever the word or image brings to us. And in the meditation, we hold it with openness of heart and the constancy of our breath. So I will read this text twice and we will sit in quiet. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense.
Reading is from a Buddhist writer and teacher, Sharon Salzburg. One of the most brilliant and best known teaching metaphors in Mahayana Buddhism is that of Indra's net. Indra, in ancient Vedic cosmology, is the lord of the firmament. His net is the universe, a net of infinite proportions. At every node where the strings of the net meet, there is a glittering, highly polished jewel. Each jewel reflects every other in the net. To look at one jewel is to see all, as in a hologram. As the Avatamsaka Sutra, an important Buddhist text, describes it, the process of reflection is infinite. In this view, to really see another person is to see ourselves. And to see ourselves is to see all beings.
It's time for our offering. Will now be given and received.
Edmund for continued healing and strengthening in body. And we look forward to your return. Know you're connected here too. Right doing and wrongdoing. These are the words that determine how we live our daily lives, the path that we are on. What is the path of right action? No shortage of noise in our world and in our media, especially this week, like every other, about what is right and what is wrong. So many questions. What is the proper? I'm just throwing some words out here. If you find my words disagreeable, it's okay. I'm just trying to ask helpful questions like everybody. What is the proper and best way for a people that are living under oppression to act upon their sense of injustice? What is the right and what is the wrong way to act? What is the right response and the wrong responses of a people with so much more power, state power, even nuclear power, and world support power? What are the rights and responsibilities of that people in response? In Sharon, where I live, if you know Massachusetts geography, you know there are many Jewish folk in Sharon, my neighbors. And so after October 7th, a question about right doing and wrongdoing concerned, how do we talk and express ourselves as a community? My son in 8th grade let us know that at school, one of his friends who comes from a family from Lebanon, she had, I think, brought maybe a Palestinian flag to school or on her backpack in support or solidarity. And very quickly on the town Facebook page, there was a conversation and a question about whether that was right or wrong. A mother connected with her family to her family in Israel, she an Israeli citizen living here in Sharon, asking families like that girl not to bring those flags to school during that time because of the pain to those connected to Israel. This week in the news, maybe you noted those university professors grilled before Congress. What is the right way? What is the wrong way? What are the right and wrong ways to talk about that conflict? I'm not going to try to answer those thorny questions this morning. Just noting that we live right in the midst, always, every day, of right action and wrong action, these weighty questions. And of course, these questions do not concern only the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis. They concern a number of world and smaller communal situations and questions. When people tell me that they approach something, anything, without judgment, I'm not a judgmental person. Depending on how well I know the person, I will say, I don't really believe that's possible. To be a human being, to act in any way, is to make judgments. It's good to be upfront and honest about that, and to be as aware as we can about the judgments we make. And as people, as human beings who make judgments about right and wrong all the time, to be willing to constantly renegotiate our own ideas of what is right and what is wrong. Even a simple task like raking my leaves. And it's not the bleak midwinter yet. I'm still raking my leaves at home. Even that task, I'm asking myself as I do it, what is the best way to do this? Always. It can get very weighty, these questions of right doing and wrong doing. And I find myself so much of the time, well, especially when I'm raking leaves, to yearn for that place that Rumi talks about in that meditation, that place beyond right doing and wrong doing, that field, that leaf pile, where we might just relax for a moment, lighten our grip on these weighty questions and relax. As a hospice chaplain for years, I always found myself in funky situations where the questions of right doing and wrong doing were not always so clear despite my training. For 12 years, had the great privilege of visiting and providing support to patients and families in Boston, every Boston neighborhood except the North End and East Boston, where I didn't travel, but every other neighborhood of Boston. And it was fascinating, illuminating, exciting, thrilling work to drive into these neighborhoods of Boston that, as a white kid who grew up in Mansfield, I had never had the occasion to venture into. And to not just venture into these neighborhoods, Dorchester, Mattapan, West Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, South Boston, all the smaller sub-neighborhoods of those neighborhoods, but to go into people's homes, people that were under so much duress as by virtue of being hospice patients, to go into those homes as a minister and to visit. When you go into people's homes, even with training about what you're supposed to do there, you never know what is going to happen. And so it was, maybe about 8 years ago, I was in Dorchester, and I was in the apartment in Boston, elderly housing of a woman, I don't remember exactly where she was from, possibly Haiti. And I was in her apartment, and as was so often the case when I came in to visit her, she was alone. Her apartment, as people's homes will do, smelled delicious. She was cooking something, and it smelled really good. And food is the language of hospitality. Even though I wasn't there to be fed, the thing to do to break the ice and to also just to be welcoming in return to her welcome was to note how good the food smelled. And it did smell very good. She smiled, and we sat and talked, and then when her food was ready, she went and got her plate. She brought it out to the couch where we were talking, and she was eating the food, and it did smell very good. And I noted again how good it smelled, just to be friendly. And this lady, she was sick. She's a hospice patient, but she had a good appetite and a lot of energy that day. And she is taking a fork full of meatball up to her mouth. She takes a bite, and with a glint in her eye, she looks at me. And I'm sitting 3 feet away next to her on the couch. And she puts the fork toward my mouth and says, "Do you want a bite?" Now, the rules, not just the rules of hospice care, but the rules of human decorum suggest that you don't eat food off a stranger's fork. So, of course, I said, "No, thanks. That's your lunch. It does smell very good, though." And with a glint in her eye, she was playing the trickster. I knew this, but nevertheless, what she said to me was, "You don't want it because I'm black?" Again, she was playing the trickster. There is that sense of all bets being off in someone's home, and that knowledge that we are in a special and strange arrangement. Me coming into her home, a stranger, she in her home, all the things at stake and at play. She knew, I assume that I was not racist in any meaningful way in that moment. I knew she knew that, but it was a dare or a challenge or something. And I had a moment to react. The reason I wouldn't eat off of that fork is because she had just eaten off. It doesn't matter who she is or what she might look like. But I had a moment to act, and I opened my mouth. I let her feed me the rest of that meatball. And it wasn't to show her that I'm not racist and that is not a problem for me, the color of her skin. But that just seemed what the moment demanded. Right doing and wrongdoing. I broke a half dozen rules about hospice work in that moment. But it seemed like the necessary thing to do. I took a risk. I'm fine 8 years later. I'm not sick. It seemed like the right thing to do to make common cause with her in that moment, to let her know I'm here. Everything separates us. Our lives are so different, and yet nothing separates us at the same time. I was thinking of that story this past week and thinking of these questions of right doing and wrongdoing and thinking about the geography of Boston and its many neighborhoods and all those lines that separate Dorchester from Roxbury, from Southie. Those lines of demarcation, the actual streets that determine where one neighborhood starts, another begins, but also the socioeconomic lines, the racial and cultural lines, all the peoples that live there. I heard in the beginning that beautiful words of welcome. Everyone's identity is welcome. And yet, all of us, like all the people in Boston, we don't just have one identity. It's called intersectionality, right? We all have many overlapping claims upon us, and it's true in Boston too. You are not from one tribe anymore. We're from multiple places with multiple claims upon us. I was thinking of this because the week before Thanksgiving, one of my closest friends died. I might have spoken about this last week. It might have been the honest thing to do because it was very real to me, and I didn't. I wasn't ready to even speak about it. My son, Charlie, my best and most honest critic, asked me after I left here why I didn't. And I wasn't ready to. I was struggling with my friend Peter's death. He died days before Thanksgiving, and he died with his sisters from New Jersey with him, but otherwise in the last year and a half of his life, a painful time where he was suffering and struggling in body with disease and pain, a 63-year-old man, suffering that year and a half alone with no one around him, and really up until his last days in the hospital, as I understand it, with no one around him. It was very hard for me because up until a year and a half ago, Peter and I were like this. He and I met, about 12 or 13 years ago in a Presbyterian church in South Boston. Rest assured, I'm not a closet Calvinist. I was just going to that church at the time because I lived in Dorchester, and my roommate, a good friend of mine, he ran a youth program that operated out of the church on Friday nights, a program for the youth of the Mary Ellen McCormick and the Old Colony housing projects, as they're called. The youth came to this church and ate a meal and hung out in the basement, made a mess of things. Again, intersectionality, those kids, whatever you might think of Southie, these kids weren't Irish youth. They were Dominican and African American and any number of other people, some of them Irish, yes, or of Irish descent, all coming to this Presbyterian church on a Friday night to hang out. So they weren't out doing other things. So I spent time at that church with my friend, and I learned that the church had a choir, and that the choir was directed by the church minister, who before he was called to ministry was in a band called Scruffy the Cat that once toured with Hootie and the Blowfish. And this minister, he is a very white guy. You look at him and you think, that guy ain't got no rhythm. The man could play the piano like he was the pianist in a black church. And he brought to this Presbyterian South Boston congregation a sense of black church music. It was incredible. And for a diverse congregation, it was important. It was music that everybody could move to. Everybody felt in their bones. I loved that music. I loved singing in the choir there. I didn't really care what was being said on Sunday mornings. I just liked the music. I liked the kids on Friday night. And I met my friend Peter, who sang in the choir. Peter, taller than me, skinny as a rail, older than me by 19 years. A paper-thin tenor voice that was so beautiful. And Peter, a real jerk. This guy was a rough customer. When I first attended the church, I had heard that just in the week before I had first attended there, Peter had gotten into a fist fight in the church with a guy named Shorty, who, as per his nickname, was very short. Shorty looked 20 years older than Peter, but they were probably the same age. Shorty walked with a walker. Shorty, the kind of guy you don't pick a fight with just because he looks unable to defend himself. Oh, but Shorty, as is true of so many of those Southie folks who came to that church, had the foulest mouth. And he would smack you hard with his cane if he was angry with you. And Peter and Shorty got into it, and they got into whatever passed for a fist fight between them, and it was broken up. Crazy things happened in the South Boston church. And Peter was often at the heart of those conflicts. He was a difficult man. I started hanging out with Peter outside of the choir. I saw something in this crazy guy with a fiery look in his eye and a paper-thin tenor voice that I just instinctively loved. Peter could be mean. He was one of these guys, one of these self-described white guys that felt beleaguered by the world, losing his place in our culture. He voted for Trump. His politics disgusted me. The language that he would use to describe the other disgusted me. He could be so angry and so unkind. And yet the same Peter would bring chocolates and leave them all around the church for anyone that might need a sweet. He was very diabetic too. He would find the children making noise in the congregation, and he would go to them during the service, and he would just get right down in their level with the sweets and be with them to quiet them. He rescued cats, cat after cat after cat. He formed this beautiful relationship with this Jewish woman from the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, a leader in the community, so unlike Peter socioeconomically. When she needed to move things from her brownstone on the South End, she would call Peter and he would go over to her home and move things for her in her apartment generously, and they'd share a bottle. No, Peter didn't drink. She would drink wine and he would drink sparkling water, and they'd share a meal. He was a guy of mixed parts. A hard guy, but a lovely guy. And I wanted to be his friend. So we started up a friendship. We hung out every week. I would have dinner in Peter's very dirty, filthy apartment in Dorchester and later in South Boston. He was a hoarder. No place to sit. He didn't work a job. He was an odd jobsman. I'd have dinner with him, and then we would go to choir practice. I hired Peter to come to my home. I had just bought, my wife and I, a home in Sharon, and Peter would come down and he would be my odd jobsman. And in an effort to keep boundaries intact, because Peter was a guy who didn't respect boundaries, I paid him fair value for his work, insisted all the time it was not a matter of friendship, though it was. I would pay him for the work that he did at my home, knowing that our friendship depended upon those boundaries. Now at the church, Peter would do all kinds of things for the good of the community. He would weed all the grass and mow the lawn. He would put paint on things that needed paint without needing to be asked. Though he had so little money, he would spend his own money to do these things. The kind of guy that a church needs. And yet, well, if you nicked the paint or if you made a mess, he might get very, very angry and give you the shorty treatment. The church, like churches do, things can get messy in community. And they weren't exactly Peter's friend the way I was. They were his community. He would do things for them and they would do things for him. But Peter, as the underprivileged white man that he identified as, did not like taking handouts. He depended absolutely on the incredibly excellent healthcare system that our state passed. He depended on the work of that Jewish woman in the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization that lobbied for the healthcare program that we have. Peter needed it as a lifelong diabetic who did not take care of himself. And he hated taking that free treatment. He later took advantage of Boston housing. He needed housing, and he hated being on the dole, as he put it. And so those boundaries, what Peter needed, were not always well kept by the church that he was a part of. He needed things from people that wanted to give him things, who wanted to do right by him. And often what Peter needed, what was right for Peter, and what was right for all the other needy people in this inner city church community, was beyond dispute. And yet for Peter, it was a great wrong to be given certain things, except when it wasn't. Very confusing and challenging to do right by Peter. Peter eventually left this church that he was a part of for 20 years. He left it because in a moment of extreme illness over the course of a year, he had lost his housing and was living out of his car. And since he weeded and painted at the church whenever it needed weeding and painting, he felt it was his privilege to use his key and go use the bathroom or sleep in the unfinished basement when he needed to. So things came to a head and he needed a place to live on his own. And the caseworker at Boston Medical Center managed, after months of wrangling, to get him at the top of the housing list. Good news. Peter's mother had died. He actually had money. He had cash, though he was living out of his car. A strange guy. Housing was there for him. Peter didn't want to spend his money. And the minister at the church, being connected to other people in the city, and again in contravention of the rules of HIPAA and all kinds of other things, he knew Peter was at the top of this list. He knew Peter had the advantage of this Boston public housing. And so behind Peter's back, he, out of his own pocket, supplied the money for Peter to get the down payment on this apartment he needed. Peter got the apartment. It was a good day. And that was it for Peter. Getting what he needed from people that wanted nothing more than to give it to him. Participating in a system that wanted nothing more to get him what he needed was too much for him. It was the wrong thing for Peter, a contravention of his own dignity and autonomy. So he left the church behind. After 20 years of being enmeshed and giving and receiving so much, he left them cold turkey behind. I had long before moved to Sharon, was not an active part of that church community. I had my own issues with them. But I mourned for Peter the loss of that community. I continued to have dinner with him once a week at his apartment off of Franklin Park. He would make me a delicious meat and potatoes meal. White man's cooking, he called it. Caveman cooking. He was regressive, and again, the language he used to describe himself was offensive even to me, but he was my friend. It was hard to hang in with Peter in that last year of those weekly dinners. Hard to see this man turn his back on those who loved him. Hard to see, after George Floyd's murder, Peter, as the way he was, getting more and more indignant and upset at the little conflicts that would erupt between him and his neighbors, most all of whom were people of color. Very hard to see this man whom I loved struggle so violently against the idea of the other and against just getting along. And so one night I just walked away from Peter. I said, no more for me. I didn't even say that to Peter. I hugged him goodbye. I couldn't take what was difficult about him anymore. I couldn't be the one person, the one friend he had in the world. I couldn't do it. And I walked away. And I didn't talk to Peter again. And I heard about him only last week when I heard news of his passing at Boston Medical Center. Not surprised, knowing how sick he was. As I thought about Peter, I thought of that field beyond right doing and wrongdoing. I thought of all the struggles, my struggles, our struggles, the world's struggles, to know what is right, know what is wrong, and to be in the thick of it with each other, not always knowing what path to choose. How do we allow our hearts to remain open? I don't know. I did it with Peter as long as I could. I remembered a story Peter told me, a story of him as a young boy. His father had gotten a call saying his mother had died, and that father left the home, unable to show his children his tears and his pain. So it went with so many fathers of that generation, I know, and fathers today, a hard thing to show our pain. Peter, alone among his 6 siblings, snuck out of the house. He told me he put on his Daniel Boone coonskin cap. This was sometime in the 60s when all the boys had those hats. And he followed his father up the power lines. And from a remove, he watched his father cry. When Peter told me that story, I saw Peter's heart. And I knew that despite all of the crap that was around Peter and part of Peter, his heart was alive and it was open, and that he and I shared love between us, but a love for our fathers, our angry fathers. We shared a love for the church and a deep distrust. We shared so much. That field where we are invited to relax by Rumi. That net of Indras where every jewel in the net, like these windows, picture a jewel at every node. We are connected in ways we can't see to the other. We struggle with our connections that we do see, the questions of right and wrong, how to be. But we are connected in such deeper ways, our hearts connected. Always. As we struggle with our questions of right and wrong, as we ask the questions we needs must ask, may we also make room for that heart connection we can't see. May we trust, even sometimes, even most of the time, despite the evidence, that we are connected to every other person and that love is there always. If we have to walk away, we have to walk away. If we have to speak in judgment, we must speak in judgment. But let us open our hearts to the other, to each other, the others in our communities and in our larger communities. May we lean into that space beyond right doing and wrong doing. May our hearts be open and may they be full. Amen. Would you join with me in the singing of hymn number 300, With Heart and Mind?
Be seated. And now if you'd look in your order of service, We have words for extinguishing the chalice. If you would like to read those with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
A final blessing for this morning. May our hearts be as open as this beautiful space. May we lean in as a church and as individuals to all the world invites us to hold. May we trust our choices of right doing and wrong doing, and may we also choice that beyond our choices there is beauty, grace, and peace. May we lean into that too. This day and every day. Amen. Let us go forth in peace.